Hello everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Digitalytics Diaries, a startup mantra series from Digitalytics, the analytics club of finance. I am Akshay Surendran, and here we unfold the learnings and lessons from the industry leaders and business experts in technology that are critical for the upcoming managers. Today, I am excited to introduce our guest for the session, Mr. Vijaya Kumar Ivaturi, popularly known as IVK, the CTO and co-founder of CrayonData. CrayonData is a global big data analytics product company based at Singapore with a development center in Chennai and clients in US, UK, and other countries. CrayonData work in the domain of market analytics, focusing much on the recommender system, about which Sir has said in one of his interviews before with the national channel. He is also co-founder and board member of India Innovation Labs, an autonomous organization aimed at contextualizing India's ancient knowledge in the research areas of HCI, computing and communications, arts, and aesthetics. So he has dedicated over 1 lakh hours to students on various forums and has impacted over 10,000 lives through his perspectives. I have also been following you for quite some time now, sir. And you're an absolute inspiration to all data enthusiasts in the country. And I am one among them. So it's an absolute pleasure for me to host you here today. Welcome to the Digital Diaries. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, sir. So can we move on to the session, sir? Can we start the session now?
Yes, please.
So we'll start with the introduction about CrayonData. So the first question will be to you that is that what was your inspiration behind building CrayonData?
I would say that in 2012, we have been debating from late 2011, but from the officially the journey started in 2012, which is about 10 years ago. So we had, I think, 2 to 3 points in mind, or I would say maybe assumptions in mind. One is that, which is the main anchor point for Crayon actually, that the most interesting data for insights is actually outside the enterprise. Whereas all analytics typically work on the enterprise data, which is internal data and mostly historical data. And hence we actually felt and in fact even realized at that time that maybe the interesting part of the insights you want is actually lying in the data sets which are outside the boundary of an enterprise. So that is the first anchor point. The second one is we felt that while the data set can be outside, maybe it needs some data set from inside the enterprise, but the way it is communicated or the way the engagement works with insights of analytics with the business users needs a lot of improvement. That means there is an experiential or the design element of analytics, not just the raw data or the raw computational insights you get. So we thought the user experience, business user experience in that sense, will be another dimension to look at. The third one is actually on the market. We also felt that the data dark markets in Asia are more important in this respect rather than the Western markets. So I think those were the three underpinnings. One is the data set being outside. Second, the experience can be a lot better. And the third, opportunity exists in the data dark or semi-data markets where the data is not really available and hence the need is felt more. So those are the three underpinnings when we started.
Right, sir. That was an insight, actually. So, adding to that, sir, back when you started, AI and big data have become the center of limelight in today's world. What kind of difficulties did you face in acquiring and convincing the customers on the tech front? Also, how were the barriers crossed? We'll be eager to know that.
So I think when you are, in our case, four of us now and three of us at that time, the core team, I would say, or the co-founding team, we came from a lot of industry experience ourselves. So in other words, I should consider or label ourselves as a middle-aged startup. Each of us have more than 25 years or 30 years experience when we started, or about 20 plus at least at the time, 10 years ago. So we believe that, this is something which is of appeal to anyone who wants to use data for their business decisions. But what we encountered is that even in the most evolved organizations where data-driven decisions are being made, banks, for example, we felt that the concept we came up with has been accepted. That means they appreciate it or maybe take the argument. But whether they would like to spend money on it, I think that's where the impedance was that, well, we agree conceptually with you, or intellectual agreement is there, but operationally, do I want to act right now? I think that's where the difference was. As we often say in Crayon's lingo, the the inevitability of that is accepted, but the immediacy is not there. And when you run a startup, there are two things you don't have. One is time, other is money. So you have to pick and choose your priorities. I think that is one on the business side of the things. The second one, while it may sound a bit strange, the acceptance of cloud native solutions is not fully there. So most of the time the POCs will be asked or would be asked on-premise, etc. But when you build a solution which is cloud native or uses cloud environment, if you want me to do it on your systems, then I need to have a similar cloud environment, even if it is hosted inside. So if somebody is not ready with it, then the cost of setting up will be more than the POC would pay for. So I think the initial hiccups on whether it is cloud native or hybrid or on-premise is one of the things we encountered quite a lot, especially in the initial years, say 2012 to 2014, 15 kind of thing. The third element is, I think, for anyone who works in analytics will know that while the holy grail is that data can give you insights, call for action, loop closure, whatever terminology you want to use, data is rarely available in the format you want. Either you have a problem with the format, either you have a problem with the type of data you have, category, or you have a problem with the depth. So all kinds of things. So I think the one of the impedance elements or the challenges, while you might get a customer or a prospect to agree to try it out, especially in market analytics, they do not have the capability or they would not want to spend their time in putting together the data set you want. In other words, we end up actually sending people to actually get that done. They say if you have a different view on how the data should be wrangled and processed and blended, then you please come and take the data yourself rather than asking us to spend so much time and figuring out what you want, right? So I think that was the data impedance problem. I think it still exists, I would say. Okay, but it got a lot better. On the commercial front, I would say, which is an interesting problem for any startup, and this is where the policy action helps actually. You are not an existing vendor to a customer if you're a startup. So I think it is a kind of a what you call an organizational design question. If you sell to a CIO, typically most of the IT is handled by a CIO in a large enterprise, then you are not a registered vendor or a supplier. But we sell to the line of business. So we sell to the business head of, say, credit cards, as an example, or digital transformation, which came later. But the environment required to be set up will go through CIO. So you will always have this kind of a who is the sponsor and who is the enabler, right? So I think the impedance required or impedance which happens there, or the reluctance in some cases, because it's also a regulated industry. It's not very easy to get data sets and all that. So I would say maybe those are the typical challenges we found. One is on the the procurement angle, the second is data angle, and third is on should I do it now and stuff like that. Okay, so I think those were the challenges. And to answer your question, how did we overcome it? Well, it took some time. because as it is the case with any business, you can win the logic, but for the action to take place, it does take time. So I think over a period of time, cloud native or hybrid cloud solutions became a norm. So we don't have to sell the concept that it's cloud native or why should somebody use cloud, etc. Second, the data sets required also became important for many of the customers where the data is about users, behavior, what they say on social media, what they do in other categories, etc. That became a little more multimodal, I would say, which became insightful when you want to run analytics. So I think that concept has been taken, and the third one is also a kind of a movement of startups, and they are taken seriously, and people, many customers, I would say, or many prospects have programs either for a kind of a startup engagement program, or they have a larger digital transformation program in which they will use an innovation budget to get into startups. So there are other commercial models which avoids the conventional registration of a supplier vendor. Eventually, you may end up doing at production, but at least in the initial stages, you don't need to do. So I think those are the things which I would say helped us as well, in addition to our efforts. So I think that I would say for any analytics startup, those years actually helped in transforming. So there is a general movement in the direction we want to go. So I think that worked.
Those three elements about the impedance and as well as CIO, about CIO also you mentioned that was quite clear. That is quite a lot of insight actually. And so I would like to add something on that which you have explained like a trailing question. Being present in the market for a long time, as your journey suggests, how industry and market has transformed over the years, like the common industry and market, I mean, and what are the visible differences that you see now in AI and big data as compared to the time when you started CrayonData?
Hmm. I would say that the first one, which is obvious, is that see, at one time, I think this has happened in many other technologies as well. If I go back to the 80s and 90s, I can argue that most of the shifts, as we often call in management theory, a decadic shift. Every 10 years, it keeps changing. It's a different argument whether it is with 80s or 85s, and you can figure out the starting year, but generally it's a decadic shift. So we don't have to now sell to anybody that a cloud native solution works and it is fine, even if you're a bank or if you are a retailer. It doesn't matter which enterprise it is. So having cloud environments as part of their production and development strategy is kind of given today. So I think that hurdle has been crossed. The second one which has been crossed is that almost everyone in the industry, independent of the sector, while there may be a degree of difference, almost all of them have some kind of an engagement with a startup or a startup ecosystem. So whether you have an incubator, accelerator, a challenge-based sourcing, whatever you want to call, whatever be the means of sourcing, almost everyone has a program related to startups. In fact, it is almost a board directive. So it is not it's a CEO, CXO driven, top management driven. So it's not some LOB head or a CIO trying to, change the bank kind of model. It's actually an orchestrated program. So I think those two got done. Now, when it comes to AI, ML, big data, I mean, they are not necessarily the same. Almost all of it is big data, if you want to call it that way. But AI/ML adoption is increasing due to many of the AI/ML models and packages are available as part of the standard programming packages. So if you, for example, when we started in 2000, late 2011, 12, when we started looking at the design, most of our reference frameworks were based on Java. In fact, it is Java, and then we use mostly, I would say, Python was less. Let me put it that way. Over a period of time, we started using more Python, and then most of the packages or libraries are available in Python. Otherwise, you'll end up doing something else in Scala or something else in native programming in some cases. So, for example, when we did the affinity calculation of cross category, it is based on graph theory. So whether I use the MapReduce, whether I write it in Java, whether I write it in, those are the things which we tried what we call native coding. Whereas today, you can maybe use an existing package to in Python or otherwise. Typically, it is Python nowadays as a default. You do have Scala in some cases or Go in some cases. So most of them are part of your programming environment. So I would say that has been the second difference. The third difference is also the deployment models. Uh, Being in cloud-based environments, I think evolved and matured a lot. So at one time it was only AWS. Now we have AWS and Azure. Then we have other clouds as well. But generally, I think most of the market is between Azure and AWS. The tools which are on top of the bare metal or the basic environments are also fairly sophisticated. So your frameworks on those environments actually do a lot of work for you. If you can, so the native or the human generated code in it is very less. So you can focus more on logic. Just to give you an example, suppose you use TensorFlow, you're only trying to figure out how to submit a job to TensorFlow and how to get the result, and not worry about the mathematics behind neural networks, or even ask the question, why do they converge in the first place? Or teach you linear algebra. In fact, 99% programmers in TensorFlow wouldn't have heard something called linear algebra, on which it is based, right? It's the same issue with graph theory, right? You may use Neo4j, but how much do you know about directed acyclic graphs? Maybe nothing. You wouldn't have heard about it. So, but you don't have to know, because I can use it as a job to submit and get the result. So I focus more on the higher order insight models and look at more on the business data, insight, call for action, closing the loop, etc. However, there are a few things which are required in deep computer science. Um, so whether it is, say, for example, merchant data, deduplication, entity resolution, some of them are quite involved. There are tools available, but I think those are things I find fairly available today. It's almost like a commoditized. I mean, if you were to ask, for example, if I run a front-end application, 99% it will be React. It will be MERN stack. So that is my default example, or a default stack today. Maybe 10 years ago, it was maybe a LAMP stack, right? Today, it will be MERN stack. So, but on the other aspect of data sets which are on the business side, I would still think whatever be the AI, ML, big data, blockchain, whatever you want to call, the new end, new stuff. Um, the conventional or traditional relational data sets still exist, and they maybe control 80-90% of your work. So I would say the AI, ML, big data, blockchain, IoT, sensor network, all what you put will only be an augmentation on what you basically derive from a relational data. So I would say maybe 80% relational and 20% document data set or a document corpus. So the text mining, image processing, yes, they're there, but it is still relational in many cases. In fact, in most cases. So I would say for those people who are studying, don't just junk relation databases.
Sir, in that case, I hope the React, which is playing a default role right now, as you said, that will be playing after 10 years, it will be playing another role, or another thing will be taking up the role of React, which is playing now. In that case, and
Yeah, so
I'll
I
further.
would say, as a general observation, having seen the industry for 35 years, don't worry about the tool chain you use. That will keep changing, right? We wrote, applications, or the front end, as now you call, on a client server architecture, or even native programming on, curses.h, if you know Unix programming, which are built from scratch. That means if you want to draw a line, I actually write a program to draw a line. So today it is, nobody will ever do that. It will be drag and drop actually. So tool chains keep evolving, and they encapsulate a lot of core functions, including some of the business methods. So the learning or the wisdom is in making sure that your concepts are right, your architecture is robust. The tool chain keeps changing. I may use Angular in some cases. I may use something else in other cases. I may use a cross development platform. How does it matter? That is based on a specific context. But the fact that I know how it works on front end, back end, middle, how the data pipeline is set up, how the ML data pipeline is set up, those conceptual models you should be right. The languages also change. For example, I learned Fortran. I learned C programming after my graduation. I'm one of the first guys to try Java. When I tried websites, there were only 8 in India. So some of the search engines we use, some of the internet tools we use were so primitive, right? But things evolve. That's okay. But I think we should make sure that our concepts are right, and the tool chains keep changing. So I think they change every 3 months. If you haven't done it for last 3 months, perhaps you will find it very difficult to figure out whether it is the same program. Um, and also, I would say that the most of the programming environments and deployment environments are more like English-like, right? In fact, we used to have a joke that Python is not necessarily a programming language, right? It's a English with restricted grammar. But now Python is considered a standard language you should learn. But if you come from Pascal and C programming or hardware-aware, architecture-aware programming models, this is considered lightweight. But it is quick to do, quick to develop. But I have to caution that while the world has changed to very quick to develop and deploy, it became harder to debug. Because when something fails, you don't know why it failed. So we have moved the problem to the other side. That's what I would say. Yeah.
But sir, I believe that all of the majority of our listeners will be having this as a very newest insights actually. They won't be aware of these things. So I'll move on to like something specific about CrayonData now. We'll be happy to know about what tools which you use there. So I would I would go to this that sir, exposure to data has increased manifolds than what it was back in 2012. So how has CrayonData transformed its strategies to make the most of it?
So I think we should look at in 3, 4 boxes so that you understand. I mean, this is how any analytics startup works. For that matter, any digital transformation program works. So one is to look at the one extreme end, which is the data sets. So the question is about what data sets you can have access to, what I can source from, and how kosher it is. So because there are a lot of regulations by sector, so if you're related to, for example, bank data, financial data, personal data, there are restrictions on what you can take, what you cannot take, where you can store and what where you cannot store, which is the residency requirement. So I think what we get from an enterprise or customer, what we source with the data partnerships, and what is freely available for fair use. I think this is the data sourcing, data management strategy or data provenance in that sense is something became very critical today. I think we have evolved in the last 10 days, 10 years, and I think that is what even we evolved as a company. So most of us, most of the time we use data partnerships, so we get data sets which are refined, which are more deeper, right? And so I think that data management, when it comes to sourcing and ingestion, I think that has got evolved a lot. The second part is now that I have the data, what do I do with it? So you normally set up a data processing pipeline. This is where all your famous tools work. Okay, but at the end of the day, you should know what you are processing for. So generally, you process the data for firing your algos, right? They are optimized for that, correct? So In the recent years, the ML data pipeline became a separate stream in that sense to figure out how the models get sourced, trained, discovered, etc. But if you remove that complication for the moment, a data processing pipeline before I fire my algos is a full-time data engineering job, right? So other one is the data sourcing partnerships. The second one is engineering. Then comes your data science. This is to figure out what model to use. I mean, there are hundreds of models you can use. The wisdom lies in actually deciding what not to use and figuring out a combination which works. It is never a single method. It is always a combination. The point is what combination, right? Uh, so the data science became a separate, dedicated team or a function, which needs data engineering for them to actually feed the data, but they actually figure out the model building. Right? Then comes the other end of it, that is the output of it. Somebody like a business analyst or a domain person should actually make use of it. Right? I can tell you a great LSTM model or a Bayesian algorithm, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't make any sense in the scoring, for example, in interpretation, then you have to work with them to make sure that it is solving a problem, a real problem. We are not here to figure out the latest in data science, right? We're not running a research organization. We will leverage it for sure. So I think the business analyst domain view or business workflow view, essentially. That means if you go by your management theory or organizational models, a business is defined as a set of processes. A process is defined as a set of workflows. And a workflow is implemented as a set of apps. And those are built on a set of or a reference architecture. And that architecture revolves on a certain technology stack, data, and the actual application stack, the engineering stack. Then there is a deployment model. So you need to look at it in a holistic fashion. So the post data science, post the domain and analytics teams, where actually there's a business insight being delivered, it needs contextualization of a particular customer or a sector. So I would say these are the ones which I think brought in a kind of a focus that each one is a little different while they all work together. It's like an orchestra, right? I do need a string quartet, right? And I need a bass rhythm, but you need the conductor. So it is not that somebody just takes the data and writes a Python code and then implements a logistic regression and then comes out with a score and then it is then thrown into the other side and say have hope for the best. So it doesn't work like that. It's also required on the customer side to explain how the insight actually solves a business problem for them. So there is a lot of business workflow closure on the other side as well. So I think this pipeline got matured a lot. And today you do find, if you go to any analytics company, you will find these teams to be distinct actually while they work together because of the depth required, right? So for example, a person, if I go a little lower in detail, if you take a person who knows image processing, that person may not be doing NLP and he or she may not be doing statistical regression. So they are actually quite finer data sets or algorithms which get a little more deeper. And if you do it on edge versus fog versus cloud, it gets even more complicated. So there are nuances, and hence these teams are generally hard for that depth, right? So you will find the maturity of this understanding and the team structures coming out in open now. It was not so open and transparent before.
I can really understand that there's a very big story behind building up of such a organization. Definitely, I do understand. Sir, I'll move on to a general question now. Sir, what according to you is that one skill which is very important for an entrepreneur, and how can one acquire or learn it basically?
So there is actually an intellectual debate as well. You can read the academic literature. The difference between an innovator and an entrepreneur. Now, in a startup, you mix both. Okay, there should be some innovation so that I can stand up on my feet with respect to the big boys. At the same time, it is a business to run, right? I can't just thrive on intangibles, right? So, if you ask me the software, I mean, remove the hard skill sets for a moment. That will be based on the sector. If there is one attribute I have to say, see, startup journey is of course an interesting journey, but it is long and hard. So what sees you through is what we call grit and determination. It is that trait which makes an entrepreneur succeed. There are many creative people. Not all of them are entrepreneurs. There are many entrepreneurs. Not all of them are creative, right? So one has to be very careful in classifying that. It's not an orthogonal classification. You do need a mix, but at the end of the day, the grit and determination of staying the course in what you believe in makes the primary difference between a successful entrepreneur and not so successful one. However, while you may believe in your vision a lot, I mean, that is why you started in the first place, it is important that you are not imprisoned by your own ideology, because one of the main traits of a good entrepreneur is their ability to pivot. So, I mean, since you are an MBA class, I would say if you have to draw a graph between vision and traction, if it is only on vision and no traction, then it's just a dream, right? If it is only traction with no vision, then you are a glorified fulfillment agency. So the truth lies in between. It is this balance which makes you pivot, change based on what you hear in the market, what the customers want versus what you believe in, while keeping your grit and determination high. I think that's the trait which makes you succeed.
Yes, sir, that answers my question very well. Thank you for that. And I'll move on to the next question then. Sir, your major learnings and experiences that you would like to share with us that can help someone who is at the initial phase of his or her technology startup. What could be that? What all could be that?
Well, I have actually written a book on that. It's called a manual for Indian startups, though it is not exactly what do you call it? It's not a cookbook, but it gives you some insights and forms and what to do with. But let me answer the question in more direct fashion. In most cases, I strongly recommend to get a co-founder. Don't do it alone unless you have a very good reason to do so. But in general, I would say please get a co-founder. You need it for many reasons. And if you are seeking in venture capital, that will be one of the questions. Single founders are difficult to get funded. Not that they can't, but it will be difficult. So I think get a co-founder for a lot of reasons. The other question or the other suggestion I have is, I think you should be able to define the problem you are trying to solve or the innovation you have or you want to have in terms of two dimensions. One, at a business process level. That is, at a business terms. What does it do? Who gets benefited? The other one, as a systems level. If I have to define it as a system, what does it contain? Otherwise, we will have lots of statements to make that I will solve the world's problem. But if you don't know what to do with it after that, so I would say looking at a system level view as well as the business level or a workflow view is an important element to consider. You may not have all the answers to start with, but you have to finally get there, because when you put your engineering costs in it, the most expensive cost in tech startup or a tech-led startup is engineering cost. You pay top dollar for it. So you cannot then hire them and then figure out what they should be doing. It will be a little too much to answer that. So you should have at least some broad direction on what they're supposed to solve. And hence, a system level view and a business level view clarity will be good to have. Not in the sequence, but try to get both. Yeah. The third one is more a behavioral or mindset or a trait, I would say. Be coachable. We we look at many entrepreneurs, people who seek funding in the angel networks. Having been part of many of the angel networks myself, and many of the jury panels I've seen, you may have an excellent product, you may have an excellent profile, you may have an excellent traction, but if you are not coachable, very few will invest in you. So your conviction on your business problem or business method or algorithm is respected. Just don't make it arrogance, right? So it's a very fine line. Generally, people are experts are very arrogant, but it's fine if you believe so. But generally, if you're coachable, it is easy to scale your startup or a venture. I would say that even for corporate life, but I'm just saying that these are the three maybe you want to keep in mind. There are many others, but these are the main ones.
That is also quite a lot of insight. Thank you for that. And sir, moving on to another question. That is something a different question. Sir, any productivity hack which you would like to share with our audience, which helped you in your journey?
In most startups, including Crayon, we all use this OKR and Agile model. So I think that's kind of mainstream today. So I shouldn't be saying, almost everybody uses it with some modification here and there, but generally it is used. At a personal level, I would say it may sound a little counterintuitive. What I do is I keep 1 week as my long day. So my unit of planning is week, but it's like a long day. So I move the task across the week, days in the week, as though it is a contiguous timeline. Because of have a slightly better aperture, I can then mix up if you want to use the old model called quadrant 2 activities, important but not urgent. So I tend to keep tasks or goals which are more reflective in nature or which need deep thinking. So that gives you, I think, a better planning period, in my view, on what should get done or what gets done. So I actually modified the bullet journal, if you know bullet journal. The bullet journal uses month as a unit. So on the left side, you have all the timeline view. You have the task view on the right. It's on a single page. It's a single frame. You can see it in one shot. I do that for a week. So it becomes my planning tool as well as my journal. But this is only for my tasks. That is, which involves time and scheduling, time and priority. But I keep actually a pen and paper or a notebook or journal, if you want to call, for every forum I'm involved in, including Crayon. I haven't thrown a single notebook in my life. I have the record of every meeting I ever took in my career. I don't delete any contact, ever. If you ever call me, I know who you are. But I use that to build my knowledge graph personally by using some tagging, etc. So my top end classification of how I store digitally and analog wise is always the same. I have some 5-6 categories and everything is pushed into that. So my top end search is better, and then I go into it. So it's the way, I'm trained as a communication engineer initially, right? So I spent half my career in communication technologies. So in communication theory, for those people who have engineering background in communication, the quality of your signal is based on how well you demodulate it. It's the demodulation circuit which determines everything. So I use the same principle in knowledge, that the way you retrieve your knowledge element determines how you store it. Is the other way. So I use it. I'm a cross-genre person. I read a lot, etc. So I have my own system with a mix of analog and digital. But I believe in tactile feedback. So I use pen and paper, even though I'm highly digital. It's a little counterintuitive for people that I mean digitally, literate person, or maybe knowledgeable person actually. I still use analog tools, but trust me, it works.
So creating a time frame for yourselves to plan and meet the goals, that is really something very wonderful. Sir, I'll move on to the last question to you. Sir, as you're aware, our audience are the student community who there will be who are data enthusiasts and future entrepreneurs, and who will be eager to hear what you have to say, you want to say, and you want to propagate to us. So, the one final question would be that what is your startup mantra for the audience?
If you have asked me this question in Indic knowledge base, I would have said something else. There is no single mantra, but let me say at least one element here which you may want to keep in mind. See, I agree that the startup ecosystem today is quite vibrant. There is enough support networks available today. And more importantly, in the society, startup career is accepted as a career, right? It is not frowned upon in that sense. However, I would like to say that a startup career is also a lifestyle choice. You cannot expect a lifestyle of working for a strategy consulting firm or an investment bank, okay, with all the perks which come with it. At the same time, want a startup, tag, which is very rare to have. So I would say because it is a lifestyle choice as well, on what kind of lifestyle you want to have, because it does have its pitfalls and up and down and stuff like that. It is a rough ride. Let me say that. Please get your family buy. It is rarely an individual decision because your family will have to support you. That is one thing you don't want to second guess. You have to guess anything else anyway. You don't know whether the idea will work. You don't know whether the market will take it. You don't know whether you'll get funding. You don't know whether your co-founder will stay with you. You don't know whether you'll get any loan at all once you work in a startup. So there are lots of imponderables. But one thing you can definitely solve is make sure to get a family buy-in.
Sir, got it, sir. That was too intuitive. And with this, we have come to the end of the session. And I'm sure that your leadership journey and insights will benefit all our listeners. And on behalf of Team Digitalytics, and I would like to thank you for taking out time from your busy schedule and for us and sharing your experiences and thoughts with the student fraternity. We are honored to have you with us for the podcast. Sir, thank you all to your listeners, and stay tuned for more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me, and all the best.